Welcome to the special guest host series of the Trauma Therapist Podcast, where I'm going to be handing over the mic to some incredible guest hosts. In each episode, you'll hear fresh perspectives and unique insights to inform and inspire you, and all the while, keeping the heart of this podcast alive. So sit back and enjoy.
So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast guest interview series. I'm Dr. Jamie Marich. I'm a frequent guest on the podcast, and thanks to Guy for extending this invitation to interview somebody who I really admire and respect, and I want more therapists to hear from. So our guest today is Dr. Janja Lalich. I jokingly say, if you've ever seen a cult documentary on one of the streaming services, you've probably seen Janja interviewed. And I respect and like her work very much. So welcome, Janja. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jamie.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into working with cults and I should say cult survivors.
Well, I myself was in a cult in the 70s and 80s. It was a left-wing political cult, and I was 30 when I joined, so I wasn't a kid. I'd lived in Europe. I had a bachelor's from Wisconsin. I had a Fulbright fellowship. I mean, I was not like a naive kid. So I was in that group for about 10 years. It was very controlling, pretty abusive. People were just decimated because all we did was sit around and criticize each other. Anyway, I got out. I was about 40 years old when I got out in the mid 80s. And long story short, I finally found some work that helped me, and I finally found a therapist that helped me. It was difficult because at the time, people thought there were only religious cults, and no one had even heard of a political cult. So, and then it was very difficult to find therapists, obviously. Anyway, I was lucky. I found a person who saved my life, I say, because I was in leadership in the cult, top leadership, inner circle, and I did a lot of really shitty things to people. And so when I got out, I was just depressed and trying to figure out how did I become that person. Anyway, I eventually went to grad school, got my Ph.D. It took me about 10 years to make that decision. And then I taught sociology for 20 years at one of the California state universities. But all that time I was working with survivors, working with families. I've written, I think, 6 books. The first one came out in 1994. And now I'm almost 80, and I'm thinking maybe I can retire one of these days.
When the world needs you most. Right now. Well, let's step back, because even in your answer, you brought up a good point about definitions. As you said, a lot of people had heard of religious cults, but not a political cult. So let's start with just the basic 101 of how you, Dr. Lalich, define a cult.
Okay. So for me, a cult has to have certain characteristics, and it can be a group or a social movement that is basically completely enamored with a leader and has, I guess we could call, blind obedience. Mm-hmm. So first of all, you have the charismatic leader who is authoritarian. And that person offers what I call a transcendent belief system, which is a belief system or an ideology that promises you everything and explains the past, the present, and the future. And within that ideology is the requirement that you have to go through a change in order to be on the path with this particular leader. Mm-hmm. And that's where the indoctrination comes in. And then basically, each group will have control mechanisms and influence mechanisms. The control mechanisms are the obvious rules, regulations, what to wear, where to live, how many babies to have, whatever. Where the influence mechanisms, I believe, are far more effective and powerful, because this is where the group is doing sort of psychological pressure on yourself and on your emotions. And so that's what really breaks you down as a person. So kind of a little bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it's important that we are clear about the kind of what I define as a closed system that I believe is a cult.
So let's talk about the major genres here. We'll start with religious cults, since that's what you brought up first. Any unique things in religious cults?
Well, I think the unique thing in religious cults, and I get asked this a lot, like, what's the difference between a religious cult and just a regular religion? And the difference is, in a religious cult, you're expected to worship this human being who is right in front of you, rather than worshiping some higher order, which is what a healthy, legitimate religion would have you doing. Yeah. So you could be, worshiping God or Allah or a tree or whatever it might be, but you're not being asked to give up your life to this person in front of you, and that's what would happen in a religious cult, and also a far greater intrusion into your life than a healthy religion. So, for example, the Catholic Church, one of your favorites, I know, is going to tell you, is going to say, don't use contraception, but they're not in your bedroom at night checking up on you if you're using contraception. Yeah. Whereas a cult is going to be doing that. They're going to have ways that they can intervene in your life.
And I know I've asked you this in other forums before. We've talked about that word cultish, that somebody may not be in a system that fully meets those finite extreme definitions of a cult, but there might be some of the qualities of it in, let's say, the Catholic Church, the evangelical movement. And that's what a lot of scholarship on spiritual abuse is about. But I digress. Let's go to the political cult, because it sounds like they can happen on both the left and the right wing. So Absolutely. What's a political cult?
Well, a political cult, just like any other cult, is going to have an authoritarian leader, an extreme ideology, and again, the ways that you're both controlled and influenced and completely indoctrinated to be a blind follower of that leader. And again, they can exist on either the right or the left. And I think what's going on today is a great example. I mean, I think we're seeing it firsthand right now. And I think, especially if we look at the rise of Christian nationalism, right. Which is really what's had probably the greatest effect on our lives and on our government and on our state legislators these past years. And if people are interested, there's, I think, a wonderful book called The Flag and the Cross, which will explain to you exactly this rise of Christian nationalism and what it is exactly.
And I've seen in a lot of the scholarship, and I've experienced this too, is it true that the leader can be alive or dead?
And yes, the leader. Yes, absolutely. The leader, the original leader, can be alive or dead. And what happens is, generally, if the leader dies, they either have set up some way that somebody's going to take over, or there may be some kind of an internal struggle where somebody then becomes the leader. But many groups, the leader has died and the group doesn't fall apart. They keep on going. And so, and you can take, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses, where the original guy died years ago, but now they have this group of elders who function in that same way, and they have what we might call charisma by proxy.
Got it. And so in your books, you talk about the psychotherapy cult. Let's hear about that as a genre.
Well, psychotherapy cults, and God knows, have been around for a long time. It's usually a therapist who forms some kind of group with his or her patients and starts to intervene in their lives and take over their lives and be completely inappropriate according to the ethics that therapists should be following. And so there have been some, quite well-known ones over the years. And I'd say they are probably many more than we even know about, because they're often going to be small and just somewhere. I was teaching some courses a couple years ago, online courses, and there would be about 20, 25 people in each course. These were, virtual. And I was actually shocked at how many people came out of therapeutic cultic experiences.
And since you talked about small, I've also wanted to clarify this term that can get used, the cult of two, or family as the cult. Like, help us understand that phenomenon.
Yeah, that's another important one, and another one that's probably goes under the radar a lot. What I sometimes call the no-name cults. And actually, my book that came out in '94 was the first time anyone even ever wrote about these one-on-one or family cults. I think over the years we've seen many examples of those where there are either a father or parents who are, extreme narcissists and completely controlling the children. In many cases, they adopt children so that they can control them. And then there are actually couples that can function as a cult. And, there was a case of years ago of what's his name, Steinberg and his wife. They were in New York. It's probably before your time. I think you're a bit younger than me. But I think that they were the first example, I think, of a one-on-one cult where he had completely controlled her, got her to quit her job. She couldn't leave the house. He kept her from her family. She didn't see anybody anymore. He eventually killed the child, which is how then the things got, revealed, and went to prison, thank God.
Yeah. So shifting gears a bit. So you are not a therapist, you're a sociologist, but you have, like you said, sought out therapy. You've worked with therapists. So help me as a therapist understand, what would you most like therapists to know here in 2025 about like the cults in our midst, as you say, and the skills therapists should be developing?
Okay. So first of all, I think there's a giant need for therapists who can serve this population of people coming out of cults, cult survivors, cult leavers, whatever you want to call them. I'll just give you an example of why. A woman contacted me a few months ago who had spent 15 years in a cult, a food truck cult of all things, in the Midwest. 15 years, lost all her money, everything, family, everything. She got out. She found a therapist. She told her whole story to the therapist about everything that had happened to her. And then the therapist looked at her and said, "Well, why didn't you leave?" I'm like, wait a minute. That's what we did 25 years ago with domestic violence, right? So important for therapists, I think, is to, first of all, know about complex PTSD and the work of Judith Herman, who kind of originated that concept. And how CPTSD is different from regular PTSD. And also, I think the really important piece about moral injury, because almost everybody in a cult, unless they're a child, becomes a perpetrator. You have to. It's the only way you can survive. Just like I was saying, we had criticism sessions. If you didn't participate, then you got criticized, right? So it's a survival mechanism. And so when people get out, their shame and guilt is probably the largest emotion and block that they're going to be feeling because of what they did while they were in a cult, either to other people or things that they saw happening that they couldn't do anything about. And so I think for therapists to understand about that is very important. And I think therapists need to be familiar with the different kinds of cults. There's the New Age cults, there's the yoga cults, there's the Eastern meditation cults, and have some familiarity. And then, obviously I'm going to plug my book, but my book, Take Back Your Life, is all about recovery. And I think every therapist should have that book, as well as my other book, Escaping Utopia, which is right now the only published work on children who grew up in cults, because then that's a whole other issue. The after effects for someone who was born and raised in a cult is going to be somewhat different from, say, someone like me who joined at age 30.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a good point, though. When you introduced yourself, you mentioned that you were educated. There were a lot of things you had going for you. And I think one of the misnomers out there is people who join cults are dumb and
stupid, lazy, crazy. Mm-hmm.
Mentally ill or whatnot. And So, is there any susceptibilities that you have seen as a pattern, or is it really that anybody can be sucked in?
Excuse me. I truly believe that anybody can be sucked in if they come across a person or an invitation or something at the right moment in their lives. And, people get recruited into these organizations generally when they're in a vulnerable place, And vulnerability is not a disease. It's something we all experience probably thousands of times in our life, right? I mean, probably everybody's vulnerable right now because of what's happening in our government, right? People are vulnerable if it's raining out, if their dog just died, if they just graduated from college, they just moved to a new town, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So when you have that little bit of unease happening and somebody comes along and offers you something, and then it looks really good and you think, okay, this might help me given what's happening to me right now. It's also important to remember that 2/3 of cult members are recruited by a friend, a family member, or a coworker, right? So it's someone who's going to do that first invitation, right? Oh, come to this thing with me and the guru is going to rise up off the chair and, or come to this self-improvement seminar, whatever it is, right? It's much harder to say no to someone you know.
Right.
And third, I think it's important. Cults don't want stupid, lazy, crazy people. When you're in a cult, you're working for the cult. Labor trafficking is probably the most common thing that happens. And so they want people who are going to run the businesses, who are going to recruit more people, who are going to have influence, be able to raise money, keep the leader happy. And so they have to be A-type personalities. And most cults, if somebody ends up joining who isn't shaped like that, they're going to get rid of them. We did that in my group. If we just would tell somebody, this isn't quite right for you, because they're a burden. And cult leaders, cult leadership don't want burdens. They want people who are going to work 20 hours a day and keep at it.
Those are all amazing points that you've highlighted. And I know they're just a small fraction of what I've learned from you and other cult scholars and deepening my understanding on this. So help us understand where we can get more knowledge, more training, whether you've mentioned some of your books. Tell us about the Lalich Center, if you would, and some of what you do and how people can access training or resources there.
Sure. So a few years ago, I I formed a nonprofit because I realized I was getting old, and I've been doing this for almost 40 years now, and I wanted to make sure there was a legacy. And so I formed a nonprofit so that I could have a way to train people who can rise to the occasion and allow me to retire at some point. And then through the nonprofit, we offer various types of workshops and courses. Right now, we have a music workshop happening, a music workshop for survivors, which is led by a music therapist from New York who primarily works with gang members. So it's a different kind of recovery tool for survivors, because a lot of people coming out of cults are going to be very wary about seeing a therapist.
Right.
And so having other ways, art therapy, music therapy, et cetera, and being kind of creative about what we offer these people. And then through the Lalich Center, we're going to be offering, hopefully this summer, a course specifically designed for therapists. We've gotten approval from the American Psychological Association to give CE credits, and it will be a home study webinar so people can take it whenever they want. And I would say probably the best thing is for people to get on our mailing list by going to lalichcenter.org. And you can either sign up for the general mailing list or just tell the admin person that you want to be on the list for therapists, so that we'll send you the announcement when the course is ready.
Great. And Dr. Lalich did a guest course with myself, my own company, Institute for Creative Mindfulness, last year. We still have the replays of that available, but we're hoping to reboot it at some point this year. And I would just tell therapists, keep educating yourself. There is a lot of wonderful content out there and what you can read and access. Dr. Lalich makes a lot of great resources available online. But if you have a chance to take a full course, this is an issue that is not going away.
Yeah, for sure.
I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are already pretty well finessed on PTSD versus CPTSD, but I think a real key of getting good with complex trauma is knowing the populations you're working with and knowing why you would never ask a question like, why didn't you just leave?
Right.
Because there's a lot behind there.
And, I think the other issue, which is going to be an individual decision, is what do you charge a former member client? Most former members, certainly in the beginning, aren't going to have insurance. They may not even be working. They've probably lost everything from being in the cult and financially. And so are you going to see that person on a sliding scale? Is there some way you can help them? Maybe see a group and have each one chip in $25 or something. But the financial aspect, I think, is something that is important to look at.
Yeah, good points all. Thank you for bringing that up. So again, want to thank Dr. Janja Lalich for being our guest interviewee today on the Trauma Therapist Podcast.
No, thanks for having me, Jamie. It's great to see you again.